Have you ever wondered what kind of world existed before the Great Flood? What kind of civilization thrived in those ancient times, now lost to the depths of history? Imagine a world where humanity was at the peak of its potential, where giants walked the earth, and where knowledge, power, and mystery blended into a reality far beyond our understanding. It was a time when men lived for centuries, amassing knowledge, crafting wonders, and building the foundations of what we now perceive as ancient myths. But this world, with all its secrets and splendor, would eventually be wiped out, swallowed by an unstoppable force that would change the course of human history forever. Subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and get ready. The ancient texts speak of a world that was not primitive, but advanced, brimming with technology, wisdom, and a level of sophistication that still baffles us today. This wasn't a time of mere hunters and gatherers. This was a civilization that had reached heights we might only dream of. The Great Pyramids, mysterious megaliths, and unexplained artifacts from across the globe hint at a forgotten era, a time when humanity possessed incredible capabilities. But what happened to this advanced society? What led to its fall? And why did the very creator of the universe decide that humanity had strayed so far that it needed a complete reset? And then there were the Nephilim, the giants, the mighty men of renown, whose very existence challenged everything we think we know about the natural order. These beings, born from the union of the sons of God and the daughters of men, walked among humanity, influencing events and shaping history in ways we can barely comprehend. Were they heroes, villains, or something far more complex? Were they the architects of humanity's darkest secrets, or simply another piece of a puzzle that stretches back to the dawn of time? The story of this pre-flood world is not just one of destruction, but also of untold mysteries and divine interventions. It's a tale that raises more questions than it answers, a narrative that echoes through the corridors of history, whispering of forgotten knowledge and warning of the consequences of unchecked ambition. As we journey through this video, we will peel back the layers of myth and reality, exposing a world that was both beautiful and terrifying. A world where humanity reached its peak, but ultimately fell to its darkest depths. This is not just a story about a flood. It's a story about humanity's lost potential, its struggle with good and evil, and the choices that led to an era's ultimate demise. Are you ready to uncover the secrets of a world before the waters rose? In the beginning, there was a place where the divine and the earthly intertwined seamlessly, a realm that stood as the pinnacle of God's creation, the Garden of Eden. Imagine a paradise beyond your wildest dreams, a sanctuary where every blade of grass, every drop of water, and every breath of air resonated with perfect harmony. This was a world untouched by sin, where beauty wasn't just seen, it was felt, experienced in its purest form. The very atmosphere pulsed with life, and the animals moved in harmony, never knowing fear or violence. Here, amidst the lush greenery and crystal-clear waters, humanity took its first breath. Adam and Eve, the very first of our kind, were not just ordinary beings. They were endowed with a divine purpose, given dominion over every living creature, and tasked with tending to this paradise. They didn't just exist. They thrived in a state of unimaginable closeness with their Creator, walking and talking with God as easily as one speaks to a friend. This connection was the source of their wisdom, their knowledge, and their peace. They understood the language of creation, the mysteries of life that we can only dream of today. In Eden, work wasn't a burden, it was an expression of joy, a collaboration with the Creator himself. Every fruit was theirs to enjoy, every animal their companion. Yet, amidst all this abundance, there was a single restriction: a solitary tree, standing as a symbol of choice and free will, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It wasn't about the fruit itself, but what it represented, a test of obedience, of trust. In this perfect world, God allowed humanity the freedom to choose, because true love, true devotion, cannot exist without the power to say no. But Eden was more than just a garden. It was the cradle of civilization, the foundation upon which all of humanity's knowledge and potential were built. Within its borders lay secrets of creation, mysteries of life and existence that Adam and Eve were meant to discover and master. This was where humanity was meant to flourish, to unlock the fullness of its potential, living forever in communion with God, with nature, and with each other. Yet, even in this paradise, the seeds of humanity's downfall were sown. The perfect balance, the flawless design, would soon be disrupted by a single act that would alter the course of history forever. But for now, in this moment, Eden stood as the ultimate testament to what humanity was meant to be. A reflection of heaven on earth, a glimpse into the divine intention for our existence. It all began with a whisper, subtle, deceptive, and laced with poison. The serpent, the most cunning of all creatures, approached Eve, and with one simple question, planted a seed of doubt that would change the destiny of humanity forever. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? In that single moment, the perfection of Eden trembled. What had once been absolute became questionable, and doubt crept into the human heart for the very first time. The serpent's words were not just about the fruit. They were about challenging the very nature of God's authority, suggesting that perhaps God was hiding something, keeping humanity from reaching its true potential. "You will not surely die," the serpent insisted, "for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." And there it was, the temptation of power, the allure of knowledge, the desire to become gods in their own right. Eve gazed at the fruit with a new perspective, one that twisted its beauty into something forbidden and desirable. It wasn't just food anymore. It was a gateway to power, a taste of divinity. And in that moment, she reached out, took it, and bit into the promise of independence. She offered it to Adam, who, without hesitation, joined her in that act of defiance. Instantly, their eyes were opened, but instead of enlightenment, they felt shame. The glory that had clothed them vanished, replaced by an awareness of their nakedness and vulnerability. It all began with a whisper, subtle, deceptive, and laced with poison. The serpent, the most cunning of all creatures, approached Eve, and with one simple question, planted a seed of doubt that would change the destiny of humanity forever. Did God really say you must not eat from any tree in the garden? In that single moment, the perfection of Eden trembled. What had once been absolute became questionable, and doubt crept into the human heart for the very first time. The serpent's words were not just about the fruit. They were about challenging the very nature of God's authority, suggesting that perhaps God was hiding something, keeping humanity from reaching its true potential. "You will not surely die," the serpent insisted, "for God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." And there it was, the temptation of power, the allure of knowledge, the desire to become gods in their own right. Eve gazed at the fruit with a new perspective, one that twisted its beauty into something forbidden and desirable. It wasn't just food anymore. It was a gateway to power, a taste of divinity. And in that moment, she reached out, took it, and bit into the promise of independence. She offered it to Adam, who, without hesitation, joined her in that act of defiance. Instantly, their eyes were opened, but instead of enlightenment, they felt shame. The glory that had clothed them vanished, replaced by an awareness of their nakedness and vulnerability. But even in this moment of darkness, there was a flicker of hope, a promise that one day, the seed of the woman would crush the serpent's head, a glimpse of redemption that would echo through the generations. Yet, this was just the beginning. The corruption that started with a single bite would spread like wildfire, tainting every aspect of human existence. What had begun as a perfect union between God and man was now unraveling, and humanity was set on a path that would lead them farther and farther from the paradise they once knew. As Adam and Eve stepped out of Eden, they faced a harsh and unforgiving world, a world that bore the scars of their rebellion. Their life, once marked by divine fellowship, was now marred by hardship, sweat, and the pain of separation from the God who had once walked with them in the cool of the day. But even outside of paradise, life continued, and soon they welcomed their firstborn son, Cain, followed by Abel, their second. These two brothers would represent the earliest embodiment of humanity's potential for both devotion and destruction. Cain was a man of the soil, inheriting the sweat and toil that his father endured. Abel, on the other hand, tended flocks, caring for the sheep with a gentle hand. When the time came to bring offerings to God, their choices would reveal the true nature of their hearts. Cain brought the fruits of the land, an offering from the ground that had been cursed by sin. Abel, however, offered the firstborn of his flock, the finest portions, the very best he had to give. It wasn't just about the offerings, it was about the intention behind them, the spirit in which they were given. God looked with favor on Abel's sacrifice, but for Cain's, he showed no regard. This wasn't a rejection of Cain's labor, but a reflection of his heart's condition. Instead of humility and worship, Cain's offering carried pride and entitlement. And in that moment, something dark took root in him. Jealousy and bitterness began to fester, and Cain's countenance fell, consumed by rage toward his brother. God, in his mercy, spoke to Cain, warning him, "Why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it." But Cain did not heed this divine counsel. In a field, under the vast open sky, he lured his brother and, in a moment of fury, struck Abel down. This wasn't just the first murder, it was the ultimate manifestation of the corruption that had entered humanity. Blood was spilled upon the earth, and the ground, which had already been cursed, now cried out with the innocent blood of Abel. The echoes of this act would reverberate through history, a chilling reminder of how quickly sin could consume and destroy. When God confronted Cain, asking, "Where is your brother Abel?" Cain's response was a haunting reflection of humanity's newfound distance from God. "Am I my brother's keeper?" It was more than a denial of responsibility. It was an outright rejection of the bond that once united all of creation in harmony. And for his crime, Cain was condemned to be a restless wanderer, bearing a mark that would forever remind him and others of the consequences of his choices. But even in this dark chapter, there were glimmers of hope. Adam and Eve were granted another son, Seth, through whom a new lineage would emerge, a line that would preserve the knowledge of God and keep the promise of redemption alive. It was through Seth's descendants that humanity would once again find its way to call upon the name of the Lord, even as the world around them grew darker and more corrupted. The first families were now divided, and the seeds of conflict that began with Cain and Abel would grow into a harvest of pain, violence, and separation. The world that was meant to be a reflection of God's glory had now become a battlefield, where brother would rise against brother, and humanity would struggle with the consequences of their rebellion. This was just the beginning of a long journey, one that would lead to even greater conflicts, darker mysteries, and a confrontation with forces that sought to drag humanity further into chaos. Imagine a world where lifespans extended for centuries, where the knowledge and wisdom gained over hundreds of years were passed directly from generation to generation. This was the reality for the pre-flood world. Adam lived for 930 years, Methuselah for an astounding 969 years, and many others reached similar ages. This longevity wasn't just a matter of years lived, it was an opportunity for humanity to accumulate unparalleled knowledge, skills, and achievements. The world before the flood was not primitive. It was a civilization that flourished with an understanding of the world that modern society can only dream of. Consider this. In today's world, an expert may dedicate 40 or 50 years to mastering a craft or field of study. But in the antediluvian era, an individual could have 400 or even 500 years to refine their skills, to pass down their knowledge, and to innovate within their domain. This meant that technological advancements, artistry, and craftsmanship reached levels that we might view as miraculous or even impossible. The great monuments of history, the towering ziggurats and enigmatic structures, might be mere shadows of what was once achieved by a people who had lifetimes to perfect their work. But this was not just about individual achievement. This longevity also meant that entire generations coexisted. It wasn't uncommon for a child to interact with their great-great-grandparents, to sit at the feet of their ancestors and hear first-hand accounts of events that happened centuries earlier. It created a continuity of culture, a shared memory that spanned millennia. This unity of knowledge allowed the development of sophisticated societies, where sciences, arts, and technologies intertwined in ways we can barely comprehend today. It is said that Tubal-Cain was a master of metallurgy, forging tools of bronze and iron. Imagine the kind of advancements he could achieve over hundreds of years, experimenting, refining, and perfecting his craft. His expertise might have birthed techniques and technologies that would be lost to the sands of time, erased by the great flood that would one day come. Jabal, the ancestor of those who live in tents and raise livestock, and Jubal, the father of all who play the harp and flute, were more than mere pioneers. They were architects of culture, creating the very foundation of society's agricultural, artistic, and technological pillars. Yet, this advanced civilization was not without its darker side. With such immense knowledge and power came the temptation to use it for self-glorification, to push the boundaries of what was possible, even at the expense of others. It's plausible that the pre-flood world witnessed feats of engineering and construction that we might label as myth or legend today. Structures that defied the natural laws, technologies that harnessed the Earth's forces, and knowledge that delved into the very fabric of creation itself. This was the world of the ancients, a world teetering on the edge of greatness and destruction. However, as humanity's knowledge increased, so did its pride. Instead of using their gifts to honor the Creator, they began to seek their own glory. They constructed cities that reached to the heavens, monuments to their own achievements, and sought to elevate themselves to a godlike status. The line between Creator and creation blurred, and in their pursuit of power, they began to unravel the very fabric of their society. This period of extraordinary development became a double-edged sword. The potential for good was matched only by the potential for evil. Wisdom and technology that could have brought enlightenment and prosperity instead became tools for oppression, greed, and corruption. As mankind drifted further from their Creator, they became increasingly enthralled by their own creations, forgetting the source of their abilities. It was a world that had the power to touch the heavens, but chose instead to spiral into the depths of moral decay. And as they pushed the boundaries of knowledge and power, they set the stage for their own downfall, unknowingly walking a path that would lead them straight to destruction. One of the most mysterious and controversial aspects of the pre-flood world is the existence of the Nephilim and the involvement of the so-called sons of God. These beings have captivated the imagination of scholars, theologians, and even storytellers for generations, standing as enigmatic figures that defy easy explanation. Who were they, and what impact did they have on a world already teetering on the brink of chaos and judgment? According to Genesis 6, the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, and they took wives for themselves, of all whom they chose. This union gave birth to the Nephilim, described as the mighty men of old, men of renown. But who were these sons of God? Some interpretations suggest they were fallen angels, celestial beings who abandoned their heavenly domain to mingle with humanity, while others believe they were descendants of the godly line of Seth, who intermarried with the corrupt line of Cain. Regardless of the interpretation, what we do know is that their actions resulted in a breed of beings that were anything but ordinary. The Nephilim, often translated as giants, were not just physically imposing. They were beings of immense strength, power, and influence. They towered over humanity, both literally and figuratively, wielding abilities and knowledge that were far beyond the capabilities of ordinary men. Their very existence was a symbol of defiance against the natural order, a living testament to the corruption that had taken root in the hearts of mankind. They were not merely the offspring of an unnatural union, but also the manifestation of a world that had chosen to rebel against the Creator's design. These beings, the Nephilim, became legends in their time, heroes of unimaginable power, but also tyrants who exploited their strength to subjugate, oppress, and dominate the human population. They may have been the driving force behind many of the great accomplishments of the antediluvian world, acting as architects of monumental structures, warriors of incredible prowess, and kings who ruled with iron fists. It's possible they were seen as gods among men, worshipped, feared, and followed. But with their influence came a tide of darkness that swept across the earth. And then there were the sons of God themselves. If they were indeed fallen angels, they would have brought with them knowledge from beyond the earthly realm, secrets of the cosmos, the understanding of metals and mining, the manipulation of energies, and perhaps even forbidden rituals that altered the natural state of reality. they introduced humanity to mysteries that were never meant to be touched, leading people down a path of forbidden wisdom that would accelerate their descent into depravity. These beings did not just teach humanity, they corrupted them, sowing seeds of destruction that would ultimately contribute to the overwhelming wickedness that grieved the heart of God. The influence of the Nephilim and the sons of God was pervasive, and their presence represented a clear breach of the boundary between the divine and the human. What was once sacred became profane, and the line between the earthly and the supernatural blurred. This was not a mere case of moral corruption. It was an existential threat to the very fabric of creation. The Nephilim, with their insatiable hunger for power and conquest, and the sons of God, with their forbidden knowledge, became the catalysts for a civilization spiraling into madness. As their influence grew, so did the arrogance and pride of humanity. Men no longer looked to the heavens with reverence, but sought to be like gods themselves, empowered by the very beings that sought to corrupt them. The Nephilim became champions of this rebellion, their might and stature embodying the ambition of a world that desired to reach beyond its ordained place. It was a time when humanity danced on the edge of an abyss, guided by beings who whispered promises of power, glory, and enlightenment, but delivered only darkness and despair. It was a world where the extraordinary became ordinary, where wonders walked alongside horrors, and where the line between salvation and damnation grew ever thinner. And as the Nephilim spread their influence across the earth, it became evident that something had to change, that this path of destruction and defiance against the Creator could not continue unchecked. The stage was set for an impending judgment, a reckoning that would reset the balance of creation and cleanse the world of the corruption that had taken root so deeply in its heart. As the influence of the Nephilim spread, and humanity continued to embrace the forbidden knowledge brought by the sons of God, a profound darkness began to take root in the hearts of men. The once harmonious and beautiful world that God had designed was rapidly spiraling into chaos and corruption. This was not a slow, subtle decay. It was an accelerated descent into moral and spiritual bankruptcy that would ultimately seal humanity's fate. At first, the decline may have seemed like a gradual shift, but with each passing generation, humanity moved further away from the original design that God had intended. What was once a society rooted in love, compassion, and reverence for the Creator began to replace virtue with vice, and the pursuit of pleasure, power, and self-gratification became the new driving force of existence. It wasn't just a handful of people who strayed. The entirety of humanity seemed to embrace this path of destruction, as if the very fabric of their souls had been tainted. Acts of violence became commonplace, and the sanctity of life was no longer held in regard. Murder, theft, and oppression became the new currency of power, and those who could dominate others with the greatest cruelty were celebrated as leaders. The strong preyed upon the weak, and the cries of the oppressed echoed through the valleys and mountains, but no one was listening. It was as if the very heart of humanity had turned to stone, incapable of empathy or compassion. The lust for power wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. People began to dabble in dark rituals, invoking forces they barely understood in their quest for dominance. They offered sacrifices, not just of animals, but of human lives, seeking favor from the dark entities they believed would grant them power. They traded their souls for a fleeting moment of strength, unaware that they were sowing the seeds of their own destruction. These forbidden practices, which had been introduced by the fallen beings, became the norm, and the line between humanity and the demonic grew ever more blurred. Sexual immorality and perversion spread like a plague. What was once a sacred bond between man and woman, a reflection of God's love and unity, became twisted and distorted. Men and women sought pleasure without restraint, indulging in every desire and impulse, no matter how depraved. The concept of family, the very foundation of society that God had established, began to crumble. Relationships that were meant to be life-giving and nurturing became sources of pain, betrayal, and abuse. The sacredness of the marriage covenant was discarded, and in its place was a culture of exploitation, objectification, and disregard for the value of human life. It wasn't just the actions of humanity that decayed, but their very thoughts and intentions. The Bible tells us that every intention of the thoughts of their hearts was only evil continually, Genesis 6:5. This means that there was no moment of reprieve, no instant where goodness or kindness could break through the darkness. It was a society that had completely given itself over to evil, and every day was a deeper dive into depravity than the one before. Even the earth itself seemed to respond to humanity's corruption. The ground, which once yielded its fruits in abundance, now bore thorns and thistles. Nature, which had been in harmony with man, now recoiled from his presence. Animals became hostile, weather patterns grew unpredictable, and the world that was once a reflection of heaven's beauty began to show signs of decay and death. But perhaps the most tragic aspect of this moral decline was the fact that humanity had opportunities to turn back. There were moments when they could have repented, could have heeded the warnings from God and chosen a different path. But their hearts had grown so callous, their minds so consumed by darkness, that they couldn't even recognize the destruction they were heading towards. They ignored the signs, silenced the voices of the righteous, and continued to march blindly toward their own annihilation. This was a society that had reached a point of no return. The corruption wasn't just on the surface, it had seeped into every aspect of life, tainting everything it touched. And as the world descended further into chaos, it became clear that something had to change, that this trajectory of self-destruction could not continue indefinitely. The cries of the oppressed, the blood of the innocent, and the stench of corruption reached up to heaven itself, and the Creator was left with a choice: to allow this cancer to consume his creation entirely, or to intervene in a way that would reset the course of history. In the midst of the darkness that had enveloped the world, there was one light that continued to shine, a light that refused to be extinguished by the overwhelming corruption around it. That light was Noah. While humanity spiraled deeper into sin and chaos, Noah stood out, a beacon of righteousness in a world that had all but forgotten the Creator. But even as humanity turned its back on God, he did not turn his back on them. Instead, he watched with patience, hoping against hope that they would return to him. This was the essence of God's long-suffering, a divine patience that waited for humanity to repent, even as the world grew darker by the day. For years, God observed the increasing wickedness of mankind, but he wasn't quick to bring judgment. He allowed time, precious time, for people to recognize their sins, to turn away from the path of destruction. Yet, with every passing day, humanity seemed to dig itself deeper into the pit of rebellion. The patience of God wasn't a sign of weakness or indifference. It was an expression of his boundless love and mercy. It was as if he was whispering to the hearts of men, giving them every opportunity to change their ways, to seek him once more. But as the years turned into decades, it became evident that few were willing to listen. Amidst this rebellion, God chose Noah to be his mouthpiece, his ambassador to a fallen world. Noah was unlike any other man of his time. He walked with God, holding on to the truth that had been passed down through generations, even as others abandoned it. When God spoke to Noah, he did so with a heavy heart, sharing the sorrow and pain he felt for what humanity had become. "I will put an end to all people," God said, "for the earth is filled with violence because of them." But even in his declaration of judgment, there was a glimmer of hope, because Noah had found favor in his eyes. God gave Noah a mission that seemed impossible, even absurd. He was to build an ark, a massive vessel that would withstand a coming flood unlike anything the world had ever seen. This wasn't just a construction project, it was a testament of faith. Day after day, Noah labored, following every instruction with meticulous precision. He built the ark as a warning to his generation, as a symbol of God's impending judgment, and more importantly, as a symbol of God's mercy. Every hammer's strike, every timber placed, was a message to the world. There is still a chance to turn back. There is still time to be saved. Imagine the ridicule Noah must have faced. Neighbors, friends, even distant family members likely mocked him, laughing at the absurdity of a man building a giant ship on dry land in a world that had never seen rain. They called him a fool, questioned his sanity, and dismissed his warnings as the ravings of a madman. Yet Noah remained undeterred. He knew that his task wasn't just about building a structure of wood and pitch. It was about building a bridge between God's judgment and his mercy. For 120 years, Noah preached righteousness, offering a message of hope and redemption to a world that refused to listen. He warned them of the coming deluge, of the waters that would rise and consume everything. But with every word he spoke, hearts only grew harder, and ears only became more deaf. They continued to indulge in their wickedness, believing that life would continue as it always had. And as Noah stood on the precipice between judgment and grace, he realized the heartbreaking truth. Most of them would not heed his call. God's patience with humanity reached its limit, but not before every possible chance had been given. Through Noah, God demonstrated that he wasn't just a God of wrath, but a God who desperately sought to save those willing to turn to him. Even as he prepared to cleanse the earth, his desire was not for destruction, but for redemption. Noah and his family were the remnant, the small spark of hope that God would use to light a new beginning for humanity. In the end, Noah's journey wasn't just about building an ark. It was about demonstrating the lengths God would go to reach out to his creation. It was about showing that even when humanity is at its worst, God's love remains unshaken. The door of the ark stood open until the very last moment, an invitation to anyone who would come. And even as that door finally closed, it wasn't because God had given up. It was because humanity had made its choice. When God entrusted Noah with the monumental task of building the ark, it was more than just a command. It was a test of his faith, a challenge to his trust in God's word. Imagine being asked to build an enormous vessel in a world that had never seen rain, in a time when the concept of a flood was as foreign as walking on the moon. Yet, Noah didn't hesitate. He didn't question or doubt. Instead, he rolled up his sleeves and got to work, believing that if God had spoken, then every swing of the hammer, every plank nailed into place, was part of a divine plan that would soon unfold. The ark wasn't just a simple boat. It was a colossal structure, an engineering marvel for its time. God provided Noah with specific dimensions: 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. These weren't arbitrary numbers. They were a blueprint from the Creator himself. As Noah began to cut the timber, he was building more than a ship. He was constructing a testament of faith, a tangible sign of obedience to God's word. Each piece of wood, every layer of pitch, was a declaration of Noah's trust in the unseen, in a future he couldn't yet comprehend. The sheer size and scope of this project meant that it took decades to complete. Year after year, Noah and his family labored under the scorching sun, the freezing winds, and the watchful eyes of a world that mocked and ridiculed their efforts. People gathered around, jeering and laughing at the crazy old man who spoke of a coming flood. "Why build a ship so far from the ocean?" they scoffed. "Where is this rain you speak of?" they taunted. But Noah wasn't building for their approval. He was building in obedience to God. Every taunt, every sneer only strengthened his resolve, as he knew he wasn't just constructing a vessel. He was forging a bridge between God's judgment and his mercy. It's important to realize that Noah didn't have advanced tools or machinery. There were no cranes, no electric saws, no modern technology to assist him. All he had were the primitive tools of his era, his hands, and his unwavering faith. And yet, day by day, plank by plank, the ark began to take shape. It stood as a testament to what is possible when human effort is guided by divine instruction. What seemed impossible became reality, not through strength or intellect, but through an unyielding commitment to God's will. As the ark neared completion, it must have been a sight to behold, a massive wooden fortress rising out of the landscape, a stark reminder of the impending judgment. It was more than just a lifeboat. It was a message to all who saw it. It proclaimed that even in the darkest times, God provides a way out, a means of salvation. But for most, it was easier to mock than to believe. They couldn't see that the very thing they ridiculed would soon become the only means of survival in a world about to be submerged in chaos. Through the construction of the ark, Noah demonstrated what it truly means to walk by faith and not by sight. He didn't need to see the rain to believe in it. He didn't need to understand the how or the why. Only that God had spoken, and that was enough. His unwavering dedication wasn't just an act of obedience. It was a testimony that echoed through the generations, reminding us that true faith is more than just belief. It's action, commitment, and an unyielding trust in the promises of God, even when the world around us refuses to see it. As the construction of the ark neared completion, God gave Noah the final chilling message: the flood was imminent. The very event that God had warned about for decades was now at their doorstep. Noah, now not just a builder but a prophet, began to spread the message with renewed urgency. He walked through towns, stood at marketplaces, and spoke with passion to everyone who would listen. A flood is coming. The earth will be covered in water, and all who do not turn to God will be swept away. His words were not just warnings, they were a desperate plea, a lifeline thrown to humanity in its final hours. But instead of heeding this call, people chose to dismiss it, to laugh at it, to label Noah as a madman lost in his own delusions. Imagine the scene: a man, perhaps covered in dust and sweat from years of labor, now standing before crowds who saw him as nothing more than a fool. He wasn't speaking of abstract philosophies or distant concepts. Noah spoke of destruction, of the very ground they stood on being swallowed by an unstoppable torrent. But the people were too entrenched in their routines, too invested in their own lives to consider the possibility that their reality could be torn apart in an instant. The idea of a flood seemed absurd, a fairy tale spun by a man who had spent too much time with his head in the clouds. As the days went on, Noah's voice became an echo that many tried to ignore. They continued to build their homes, plant their crops, and celebrate their feasts, as if life would go on unchanged forever. They laughed at the idea of rain falling from the sky in such volumes, claiming, "It's never happened before. Why should it happen now?" They couldn't fathom that the God who had created them was now preparing to cleanse the earth of their wickedness. They mistook God's patience for inaction, His mercy for a lack of resolve. Noah's message wasn't just about impending judgment. It was also an invitation to salvation. The ark, with its towering structure and carefully crafted design, stood as a beacon of hope amidst the looming darkness. Every nail driven into its wooden frame was a testament to God's desire to save, to provide a way out. Yet, even as the door remained open, inviting anyone who would choose to enter, the people stood outside, mocking what they could not understand. They saw the ark not as a refuge, but as a symbol of Noah's foolishness, unable to see that this foolishness was actually their last chance at life. Perhaps Noah felt the sting of their rejection. Day after day, he poured out his heart, pleading for them to see the truth, to recognize the signs, to turn back to God before it was too late. Yet, instead of softening, their hearts grew harder. It wasn't just that they rejected the message, they actively resisted it. They were not merely indifferent, they were antagonistic, choosing to mock and ridicule what was meant to be their salvation. This is the tragedy of humanity, to have the chance to be saved, yet to reject it because it doesn't fit into our understanding of how life should be. And so, with each passing day, the opportunity to repent slipped further away. The skies grew darker, the air grew heavier, but the people remained blind to the impending storm. They danced, they laughed, they lived as if they had all the time in the world, not realizing that with each passing moment, the door to the ark, their only hope, was slowly beginning to close. This chapter of Noah's life wasn't just about building an ark, it was about building faith in the face of rejection. It was about standing firm in what God had spoken, even when everyone else turned their backs. It was about being a voice in the wilderness, calling out to those who would not listen, hoping that somehow one heart would turn, one soul would be saved. But as the rain clouds gathered, it became painfully clear. Humanity had made its choice. And then, it began. The day that would forever change the course of human history started like any other. The sky hung heavy with an unusual darkness, clouds swelling with a sense of foreboding that everyone felt but refused to acknowledge. Families went about their morning routines, children played in the streets, and merchants peddled their goods in the marketplace. But something was different this time. Something ominous. Noah stood by the entrance of the ark, his heart racing, knowing that the moment he had spoken of for decades was finally here. And then, with a crack that split the heavens, the first raindrop fell. That single drop was soon joined by countless others, cascading from the sky with an intensity never seen before. It wasn't just rain. It was as if the heavens themselves had torn open, releasing all the waters they had held back since the beginning of time. At the same time, the earth trembled, and great fountains erupted from beneath, releasing torrents of water that surged from the ground. In an instant, streams became rivers, and rivers turned into raging floods. The very fabric of creation was unraveling, and the world as they knew it was being swallowed by the deluge. People, now gripped by terror, ran to higher ground, scrambling for safety. They beat against the door of the ark, desperately pleading for entry. "Noah, let us in! We believe you now!" they screamed, their voices barely audible over the deafening roar of the waters. But it was too late. It wasn't Noah who had closed the door of the ark. It was God himself who had sealed it, marking the end of his extended grace and the beginning of his righteous judgment. The rain continued to pour, unrelenting, and the waters rose higher, swallowing homes, fields, and entire cities in a matter of moments. Inside the ark, Noah and his family felt every lurch and shift as the ark was lifted from the ground and carried by the violent waves. It must have been a surreal and terrifying experience. Hearing the cries of those outside, feeling the massive structure creak under the weight of the water, and realizing that they were the only living souls left on the planet. The ark became their sanctuary, a wooden cocoon cradled by God's mercy amidst a world being torn apart by judgment. It was a powerful reminder that even in the midst of wrath, God always preserves a remnant, a people who choose to follow him even when the rest of the world turns away. The rain continued for 40 days and 40 nights, unceasing, relentless. Entire mountains disappeared beneath the rising waters, and the earth, once vibrant with life, was now an endless, turbulent sea. Everything that humanity had built, its cities, its monuments, its achievements, was wiped away, erased as if it had never existed. The world before the flood, with all its pride, wickedness, and rebellion, was being buried under layers of water, its memory washed away by the wrath of God. Yet, even in this moment of unparalleled destruction, there was redemption. The ark floated safely above the chaos, carrying within it the seeds of a new beginning. Every animal, every plant, every family member aboard that vessel represented a fresh start, a second chance for humanity. The ark wasn't just a means of survival, it was a symbol of hope, a promise that God's story for mankind was far from over. Imagine Noah, standing by a window of the ark, watching the waters rise, knowing that everything he had ever known was now gone. And yet, in his heart, there was a flicker of hope, a quiet assurance that God was still in control. The floodwaters that brought death to so many were the very same waters that lifted the ark, carrying it to safety. This paradox of judgment and redemption serves as a powerful reminder of God's nature. He is both just and merciful, righteous and loving, willing to cleanse but always eager to restore. The flood was not just an end, it was a reset, a chance for humanity to start anew. And as the rain finally ceased and the waters began to recede, the stage was being set for the next chapter in God's plan, where grace and mercy would continue to shine through even the darkest storms. As the waters receded and the ark found its resting place on the mountains of Ararat, Noah and his family stepped out into a world that was unrecognizable. It was as if the earth had been reborn, cleansed, purified, and reset. Every trace of the old world, with its corruption, violence, and rebellion, had been washed away, leaving behind a blank canvas for humanity to start anew. And as Noah gazed at the endless horizon, he must have felt the weight of what had just transpired and the immense responsibility that lay ahead. The flood wasn't just a catastrophic event, it was a profound lesson written in the pages of history with the ink of water and tears. It was a testament to the fact that God takes sin seriously. The world before the flood had become a place where evil was not only tolerated, but celebrated. People had forgotten their Creator, indulging in every kind of wickedness imaginable, and in doing so, they brought about their own destruction. But the flood also revealed something extraordinary about God's character, his willingness to offer a second chance, even when humanity seemed beyond redemption. Noah's survival wasn't because of his own righteousness or perfection. He too was human, flawed, and imperfect. Yet he found favor in the eyes of God because he walked in obedience and faith when everyone else chose to rebel. It's a reminder that God doesn't expect us to be flawless. He's looking for hearts that are willing to trust Him, to take that first step in faith even when it seems absurd or impossible. And it was this obedience, this act of unwavering faith, that not only saved Noah but ensured the survival of the entire human race. As Noah and his family began to rebuild their lives, God established a new covenant with them, a promise that He would never again destroy the earth with a flood. And to seal this covenant, He placed a rainbow in the sky, a beautiful, multicolored arc that stood as a symbol of hope, mercy, and divine commitment. Every time they looked up and saw that rainbow, they would be reminded that God's judgment is always tempered with mercy, that His wrath is never the end of the story, but rather the beginning of something new and beautiful. The lessons of the flood extend far beyond that ancient world. They reach into our lives today, challenging us to examine our hearts, to consider the paths we are walking. Are we, like the people of Noah's time, chasing after our own desires, forgetting the one who gave us life? Or are we willing to be like Noah, standing firm in our faith even when it means standing alone? The flood reminds us that God is patient, but there is a limit to His tolerance of sin. There comes a point when judgment is inevitable, not because God is eager to punish, but because He knows that unchecked evil only leads to destruction. Yet, in the midst of judgment, there's always grace. Just as God provided an ark for Noah, He has provided a way of salvation for us today, a way to escape the floodwaters of sin and find refuge in His love. And just like Noah, we are called to build, to prepare, and to trust, even when it seems like the world around us is descending into chaos. Noah's story is a story of beginnings, of second chances and fresh starts. It's a story that shows us that no matter how dark the storm, no matter how high the waters rise, there is always hope on the other side. And as the rainbow stretched across the sky, God wasn't just promising Noah a new beginning. He was promising all of us that there's always a way back to Him, always a path that leads from judgment to redemption, from death to life. As we reflect on this journey into the world before the flood, one thing becomes crystal clear. History is not just about the past. It holds lessons that echo into our present and future. The story of Noah and the antediluvian world is more than a tale of judgment and destruction. It's a story of faith, obedience, and the enduring hope that even in the darkest times, there is always a way back to God. Just as Noah stood as a beacon of light in an age of overwhelming darkness, we too have the opportunity to be that light in our own time, to walk in obedience, and to trust in God's promises, even when everything around us seems to be falling apart. Now, if this video has inspired you or made you think about your own journey, I encourage you to take a step of action. Make sure to subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and hit that like button to let others know that you found this message valuable. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story today, because sometimes all it takes is one message to change a life. And if you're looking to dive even deeper into your spiritual journey, I want to introduce you to the 7-Day Healing Miracle. It's a powerful guide that takes you through a step-by-step process to experience healing and transformation in your life, just as Noah experienced renewal in his. Click the link in the comments below and begin your own path to restoration. Leave a comment below sharing your thoughts on this story. Do you believe we're living in times similar to those of Noah? Let's create a conversation and learn from each other's insights. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, no matter how high the floodwaters rise, there's always hope, and there's always a way to rise above.